Okay, so part 2 of the cell structure video, and we've been spending a bit of time looking at organelles that are common to all eukaryotic cell, regardless of whether you're plant or animal, or fungi or protists for that matter. These organelles are found in all eukaryotes. Looked at some amazing organelles, things like a nucleus, which contain the DNA, the endoplasmic reticulum, rough or smooth, which help to synthesize and transport throughout the cell proteins and lipids, and then the Golgi apparatus, which helps to repackage and modify those proteins and then transport them out of the cell, thanks to vesicles as well. So some awesome organelles, I'm sure you'll agree. But each of these organelles facilitate processes which require some form of energy. They require energy in order for all of these different things to happen. So where are we going to get the energy? Where is this eukaryotic cell getting this source of energy from? Of course, it is the mitochondria, and we will find mitochondria in all eukaryotic cells because they all need energy to do those processes and a whole range of other things as well. So mitochondria is, and we'll look at mitochondria more and more throughout this unit. We will cover cellular respiration, so we'll spend a bit of time looking at the structure of the mitochondria then. But hopefully you should know it's a membrane-bound organelle, but it's got a double membrane, we say. It's got this smooth membrane all around the outside of the kidney bean shape, the shaped organelle, and then this really intricately folded membrane on the inside, the inner membrane. And this double membrane, we'll see, is similar in a way to the chloroplast as well. It's also got a double membrane, and it tells us a bit about the origin of these organelles, how they came to exist. But anyway, more on that later. The inner membrane has lots of folds in it, as I said, and these folds are known as cristae, with an interesting spelling there with an AE on the end. We'll come back to those in cellular respiration. And between the membrane is the matrix. It's like a gel-like fluid that's found in between each of those folds. Mitochondria also has some DNA. It's got a little bit of DNA itself, some circular DNA found in there. And that's going to be important in many respects in the future as well. But anyway, the function of the mitochondria, that's the key. We often say that the mitochondria, well, I don't know if we do often, but I often say that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's meaning that it's that drives it, it's the thing that gives the energy. But again, that's a very generalized description of what it does, and we need to be specific about its function. And so its function, specifically stated, is that it is the site of aerobic cellular respiration. And that means it produces ATP within the cell via aerobic cellular respiration. So that's a specific description of what its function is. Last thing I've got on here is that it occurs in large numbers in certain cells. Now, that means that some cells might need more energy than other cells. If you're a muscle cell, you probably need a lot of energy because you're constantly having to expand and contract to help facilitate muscle movement. In that case, you need lots and lots of mitochondria to supply that energy. So not all cells are created equal. They've got different functions, and therefore they will have different concentrations of organelles. And actually the same can be said of the other organelles. The Golgi complex can be found in different concentrations in different cells depending on their function. So mitochondria. All eukaryotes have got a cell cytoskeleton. We've already kind of mentioned that before in the commonality of all cells. As I said, it's like a cell scaffolding. It provides a passageway for things to move throughout the cell, but it also helps for mechanical support of the cell, keeping it nice and rigid and making sure it doesn't collapse in on itself. It's made up of, and kind of got the diagram down the bottom here, all of these tubes that are connected to each other in a lattice type structure. Those tubes are things called microtubules, and they're structural proteins that give them their strength. So those things are common to all cells, or particularly to plant and animal cells. Things that aren't common to all plant and animal cells, things that we might find only in an animal cell or only in a plant cell, we need to know these distinctions. And some of them will be pretty obvious, like the first one here, the chloroplast. Only located in plant cells, not located in animal cells. Also found in some protists, but we're not worrying about them now. We're worrying about the difference between plant and animal. No animal cells will have a chloroplast. We cannot photosynthesize, alas, but plants can because they do have chloroplast. Of course, it's not in all of their cells, it's in their cells that are green, so things like often stem cells or leaf cells, but it's not in root cells, because why would you bother having an organelle that requires sunlight in your root cells? So its structure, as I mentioned before, it's got a double membrane. So it's, again, a smooth outer membrane and an inner membrane that's really folded into these stacks. These stacks are called thylakoid discs, and when they're joined together, many of them together, it forms a structure known as a grana. And the grana is where we would find the chlorophyll within the chloroplast. Now, I always remember that because chlorophyll's green, grana starts with a GR, so it's the green thing, so it contains the chlorophyll. Surrounding all the grana is the stroma, which is, again, it's a gel-like fluid where we'd find, I've got some visitors out here, no idea who that guy is. Anyway, keep going, the show must go on. Okay, so it's the fluid that surrounds those stacks is the grana. And we'll come back to the function of those different parts when we look at photosynthesis in a bit more detail. Chloroplasts, like mitochondria, have a little bit of DNA in them as well. Some circular DNA gives a hint to what its origin is. Its function, specifically, it's the site of photosynthesis. This is where photosynthesis occurs. Okay, so chloroplasts are one of a group of plant organelles known as the plastids. The other two in that group are leucoplasts and chromoplasts. Not so important, really not worried about leucoplasts and chromoplasts, so let's move on. But more important is the lysosomes. Now, lysosomes switched. We won't find lysosomes in plants, generally speaking, although there is a little bit of debate about that. I think as I've got here, may occur in plant cells. We're not 100% sure yet, but for now we know that they're really dominant in animal cells. You'll find lysosomes in animal cells, that's for sure. And these are sacs, similar to a vesicle, basically, a membrane-bound sac that is floating around in the cytoplasm. They are a sac, though, that's got a really specific purpose. They contain digestive enzymes. And they're made at the Golgi apparatus, so they'll bud off from the Golgi apparatus containing these digestive enzymes. And their function is partly for intracellular digestion of molecules. So if the cell takes in some large macromolecules and it needs to break them down, or it's got some macromolecules within the cell that it needs to break down to recycle some of the components perhaps, then it will use a lysosome to do that. It will merge the lysosome with the vesicle that contains those molecules, and the digestive enzymes will break them down into smaller parts that the cell can then recycle. So the lysosomes contain digestive enzymes. We'll also see that lysosomes play an important role in apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. When a cell is instructed that it's no longer required, it will undergo apoptosis, and lysosomes help the cell to achieve that. That's a diagram that's kind of hard to interpret, so we'll go through that one in class. It basically just details some of the steps in lysosome function. Come back to that because it might be a good flow diagram that we want to get our head around. Okay, centrioles you might be familiar with when we looked at mitosis. Centrioles are not found in plant cells. They're only found in animal cells. They function as a pair in animal cells. They're made up of microtubules, which are protein filaments, and they are involved in cell replication, or in mitosis, and also in meiosis. They're the things that send out the spindles, which then direct the chromosomes to move to different parts of the cell. Hopefully this is ringing a bell from studies into mitosis. So not found in plant cells, only found in animal cells. And the cell wall, of course, you know the cell wall already. You know that animal cells do not have a cell wall, but plant cells certainly do. And the cell wall lies outside of the cell membrane. The cell wall is the outermost layer of the cell. And in plants, the cell wall contains cellulose, and that's an important molecule we need to remember. Cellulose is a polysaccharide. It's a carbohydrate, a complex carbohydrate. But fungi and bacteria also have cell walls. They contain different things. As you can see, a fungi cell wall contains a substance called chitin, and a bacterial cell wall contains a whole bunch of things, particularly something called peptidoglycan. So the function of the cell wall is largely to protect the cell. It's a thick layer on the outside of the cell. It might protect the cell from pathogens, things like insects being able to get inside the cell. It also gives the cell good structure. So it maintains that shape of the cell, and therefore will help to maintain the shape of the whole plant, the entire plant. Remember, plants don't have skeletons. They manage to stay upright by having this rigid cell wall in conjunction with their central vacuole. It also helps to prevent excess water uptake from the cell as well. Remember, plant cells, if they are put into a hypotonic environment, can only take up a certain amount of water, because eventually their cell wall will prevent further uptake as the cell expands out against that cell wall. Okay, and finally I think we'll finish with cilia and flagella, which are different structures but often perform a similar function. We can see we've got cilia down the bottom here, which are these many hair-like structures on the outside of this bacterial cell. And then we've got a few flagella on this other bacterial cell. And flagella are these long filaments, and there's only a small number of them as opposed to the many cilia that we would find. We've got another visitor coming in as well, possibly Miss Ferrugia. Hi, Miss Ferrugia. Sorry to scare you. One second. Okay, I'm back. Seamless transition there, I'm sure. So, cilia and flagella, they are on the outside of the cell, anchored to the cell membrane of some animal cells, not many. I mean, sperm cells will have a flagella. They're probably the only animal cells that will have a flagella. A number of animal cells will have cilia though. And a lot of unicellular organisms will have these because they're really important for cell motility, from the cell being able to move around. So bacteria and many protists will contain cilia or flagella. Don't think any plants have cilia or flagella though, as far as I know. As you can see, they contain microtubules once again, these protein filaments that really provide a strong, rigid structure, and these microtubules pop up all the time in cells. We've seen them in centrioles and in the cytoskeleton, to name but a few. Okay, as I said, their function is cell motility, so helping a single-celled organism or a single cell being able to move around, but sometimes they can be held in place and they will help fluid move across their surface. An example that springs to mind is the cells lining the trachea, the human trachea, have cilia on them, which helps the mucus fluid move up the trachea. Lovely. Okay. The rest of this goes into a little bit of detail on bacteria and protists and fungi, but not too stressed about that. So I think we might leave that video there, which should give us an overview of some of the different types of cells, the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and the differences between plants and animals, and some of the structure and function of the key organelles that you'll need to know to get started for this Unit 3. Okay, thanks very much for watching. Again, feedback is always appreciated, and happy to take anything on board. So thanks.